Oh, imagine trying to tell the British public that we're all going to spend more on defence now. That's going to go down really well, isn't it? I'm sure, given the cost of living, given how people's lives are at the moment, they're not going to want to hear that we're spending more on weapons.
That is a difficult political sell when you're talking still about the winter fuel allowance and whether it's going to be reversed or whether it's going to be redefined.
And you said, well, actually, I'm sure people thought that in the 1930s, right? And it really sent a chill down my spine, because I thought, well, maybe nobody ever thinks that they have to be ready for war. And maybe what we are hearing from Keir Starmer is there is an urgency here.
We are moving to war-fighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready, to deliver peace through strength.
These are strong words from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He talked about making Britain battle-ready, armour-clad. Is he telling us that we should now be on a footing for war? And if so, what does that mean about Britain's priorities?
And at a time of increasing unease on the Labour benches and among Labour activists, is there a perception that Keir Starmer is more interested in the warfare state than the welfare state? Welcome to the News Agents. It's John.
It's Emily, and we're going to start with that defence spending announcement, but stay with us for an absolutely extraordinary interview with the actor, the award-winning actor, Eddie Marsan. He's starring in a 6-part BBC drama at the moment, but he is somebody that you will recognise from Vera Drake, Happy Go Lucky, Gangs of New York, The Illusionist, V for Vendetta, Silent Witness, Southcliffe. He is prolific, but he is also incredibly thoughtful about the state that Britain is in. And he is a white, working-class East End boy with a very strong message for Tommy Robinson.
But we're going to start with the much-flagged, keenly anticipated Strategic Defence Review, which is the big piece of work that the Labour government has been working on with the help of George Robertson, the former Labour Defence Secretary from the Blair era, who then went on to be Secretary-General of NATO. And it's talking about a Britain that can no longer talk about peace dividends and turning swords into ploughshares, but how we turn the ploughshares back into swords because of the increasing threat being posed by Russia following the invasion of Ukraine, and that being matched on the other side of the Atlantic with an America that today, under Donald Trump's leadership, seems to be more and more agnostic / disinterested / hostile to the idea of NATO and a Western defence umbrella.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This phrase that he keeps using, sort of falling back on, is a NATO-first strategy. And that, not surprisingly, has been welcomed by Mark Rutte, who's the NATO Secretary-General. He's backing Keir Starmer and he's saying, look, we want to hear that from all the European leaders, all the European countries. And it is a sense of Europe having to do stuff on its own, or at least NATO having to do stuff on its own without relying on the US, which has become, what can we say, a much less reliable ally and neighbour in the fight against Putin right now. And there are lots of things that you'll want to pick out of this speech. One of them is the location, which is Glasgow, a southern part of Glasgow, the Govan area, which was the shipbuilder to the world at one point. So Keir Starmer is, I think, very consciously trying to tie not just the need for Britain to defend itself, but the need for Britain's economy to start revolving around a defence structure. And I was at a dinner, I was invited to a dinner about 2 months ago, and there was a very senior member of Downing Street there, and there was an EU ambassador and a former EU president. And the conversation at the time was about how the UK had to start manufacturing arms, arsenal, weapons, not just to sort of arm itself, but because this was the thing that was actually going to generate the economy. And this could be the backbone of any future growth strategy for the government. And I remember sort of sitting there slightly open-jawed, going, really? Do we just want to make weapons? Is that what we're about now? And there was this weird consensus around the table. I mean, there was a former defence secretary there as well, and they were saying, yeah, that's actually this is the two-pronged strategy. A, NATO needs more weapons, and B, the UK economy needs more growth. This is all a very, very deliberate, coordinated strand of how to sort of refoot what is happening to our economy.
And of course, that is a difficult political sell when you're talking still about the winter fuel allowance and whether it's going to be reversed or whether it's going to be redefined so that different people can apply for it, when you're still maintaining the two-child cap on child benefit, which Gordon Brown has been very active in saying needs to be lifted if you want to alleviate poverty among families, and that could be the most effective weapon yet. And Keir Starmer is having to say, well, I don't think we've got the money for that right now, but there is money for defence. And I think that is the thing that causes unease in Labour circles, because, Labour has always been on that edge of politics, closer to CND, closer to the anti-war alliance, a bit more pacifist. And there is a strong element within the Labour movement that will be horrified about the idea of more nuclear submarines or more defence establishments being built to manufacture weapons. That isn't part of a lot of Labour's DNA. And yet Keir Starmer is taking the view that because of the uncertainty that we face in the world, in the mid-1930s, were people
I was
thinking...
going to say, this, to peek behind the curtain, this is the conversation that we had.
Yeah.
And I said, imagine trying to tell the British public that we're all going to spend more on defence now. That's going to go down really well, isn't it? I'm sure, given the cost of living, given how people's lives are at the moment, they're not going to want to hear that we're spending more on weapons. And you said, well, actually, I'm sure people thought that in the 1930s, right? And it really sent a chill down my spine, because I thought, well, maybe nobody ever thinks that they have to be ready for war. And maybe what we are hearing from Keir Starmer is there is an urgency here. I don't want to scare you, but there really is an urgency. And the German defence minister actually just this week said, well, if Putin gets his way with Ukraine, then Lithuania will be next. And so people are starting to, I guess, delineate what the next stage of Putin's war looks like. And we have to decide whether we think it's all bluster. We think, well, OK, let's solve child poverty first before we get into World War III, or whether we actually are being told something that we can't yet imagine because war is always unimaginable.
War is unimaginable. What we've seen with Ukraine is war is changing.
Yeah.
The attack that took place yesterday on those airfields, taking out a third of Russia's strategic bombers, is astonishing. Astonishing. Russian bloggers are calling it Russia's Pearl Harbor. When, the Japanese Air Force launched the attack on Pearl Harbor and took out so much of the US.
And it was completely unexpected. They all missed it, yeah.
These drones were they were high-tech drones, but they're cheap pieces of kit that were put in crates, that the crates were self-opening. They'd been transported to various places in Russia secretly. The flick of a switch, the order of a computer, the press of a button, the crates open, a swarm of drones come out that then target the rows of bombers lined up on runways, one of them 3,500 miles away from Ukraine. Embarrassing for Putin doesn't begin to describe what happened yesterday. These are little drones that did all of that.
Doesn't that make the case then that Keir Starmer doesn't need to overspend this kind of money? If we saw the Hezbollah pager explosion by Mossad Israelis in Lebanon. We've seen that. Isn't the message we're getting that if warfare has changed so much and it's become this sort of insurgent, scrappy, almost DIY kind of weaponry, why are we spending all this money on nuclear submarines then?
Because I suppose the argument would be is that Russia does have these weapons, and the only act of deterrence that you really have in the ultimate nth degree, and this is where people on the pro-CND, anti-CND argument kind of diverge, the conventional defence argument is, mutually assured destruction is what keeps the peace, and therefore those old doctrines of Cold War MAD, are still relevant today. But I mean, you make a really good point. If it's getting scrappy, I mean, you look at what's happened with the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, where swarms again of drones have been attacking ships, and America have been sending up £150,000 missiles to take them out. These are £200 drones. And what you're having to do, and so there is a real serious argument about whether defence capability is kind of dealing with the threat that is currently there, or the threat that was there 10 years ago. And that's something that the Strategic Defence Review is trying to answer.
I think Keir Starmer's also finding a bit of political space in this by saying, if you want populism, if you want Nigel Farage, he's a friend of Putin. He famously last year said, it was kind of, the invasion was NATO's fault, essentially. And so I think Starmer feels that he is sitting on the side of, we take Russia aggression seriously, we take Putin seriously. If you want Farage, knock yourself out. He's in bed with a Russian dictator. And he's saying we take it seriously. And I suppose part of what he's doing, and we have talked about this whole relationship that Keir Starmer has now with Farage, whether to kind of take him on and kind of pull him apart, verbally, visibly in his speeches, or whether to pretend he doesn't exist and to sort of, shut him into a box and hope he goes away. And I think this is somewhere that he's found to say a clear Labour policy is recognising this Russian aggression and doing something about it, preventing it. We're not him.
I think that is a very important space, because Farage seems to occupy the same space as Donald Trump, which is Vladimir Putin an enemy, or do we quite like him, really? Do we like his boldness? Do we like his, anti-woke policies? Do we like all those things about Vladimir Putin? And Nigel Farage seems to have gone along with a lot of that.
I think it's the one place that's uncomfortable for Farage.
Yeah,
isn't
really.
It? He's got so many tanks on the Labour Party's, on the government's lawn, in terms of what he says he'll do for ending the cap on the two-child benefit, and stuff that Starmer hasn't yet found the courage or maybe the money to go for. But this is the one place where Farage looks deeply sort of unsettled and keeps on sort of rowing back from earlier comments, because he knows that hasn't landed very well with the British public.
And the other thing that makes it a bit easier for Starmer with his own backbenchers is you've got the Tories and the Liberal Democrats saying, but we should be doing more. No one's saying we should be doing less.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Because just to go back to the Defence Review today, the three authors have said they recommend a 3% of GDP spending. Keir Starmer will tell you that he's managed his manifesto commitment, which was a pledge of 2.5% in the next few years. That's achieved by cutting foreign aid. He won't commit to a date on 3%. He says he'll do that when he can find the money. And it strikes me that, and actually I was talking to another, EU ambassador who was kind of looking on this kind of spending announcement today with something that I'm only imagining is a sort of head scratch. And that is, look, we can see that you need more money for defence. We can see you need more money for ending child poverty. We can see you need to end the winter fuel. We can see all these places where money needs to be spent. Just spend more money, right? Just get over yourself. Just either break your fiscal rules or work out how to tax people who can afford it more. But spend more money. If everything is pointing to the need to spend more money, spend it.
But I also think that in Europe, the other European nations, even though we're not in the EU, but we're part of NATO, is that they are looking to Britain to be in the vanguard of all of this, because the British Armed Forces are still probably the most capable within Europe, and therefore if you're trying to persuade Italy and Spain and Portugal, as well as a lot of the other countries, to step up, then Britain's setting an example of 2.5% by 2027 is part of that. And I think that will be welcomed in America, where we watch to see Donald Trump's ambivalent relationship with NATO and what it means for strategic planning in the long-term future.
And in a moment, we'll be hearing from Eddie Marsan, the actor, a white working-class East End boy, on how you face down the populist threat. It is amazing to have with us Eddie Marsan, who you'll probably know from about a billion different things. Actually, I'm just trying to think. I know you won the London Film Critics Circle Award, and you did that with Happy Go Lucky. But you're here today to talk about the Lockerbie bombing drama, and it's just been made for the BBC. And you play this Kentucky FBI agent, and we were discussing this, and I found out something weirdly about John as I did this, which is you covered Lockerbie. I never even knew that.
Yeah.
So, it's weird. I mean, I guess the first question really to you, Eddie, is how you came to the drama.
They approached me, asked me to play Tom Thurman, and when I read it, what struck me about the drama was that it was so tastefully written and extensively researched. It took 8 years to develop. And because of that, it's a beautiful tribute to the Lockerbie community, the small police force who had a plane land on their village, and the cooperation between the different investigative teams from across the Atlantic to the Scottish, and the just the way that the collective response to a tragedy. Really, it's a sad story, but an inspiring story.
I mean, it all happens in that week before Christmas,
Yes.
and you feel really powerfully the sort of no one can quite grasp the weight or the scale of what has just happened. This was a crime scene that cast its parts and its people, its passengers over
Yes.
800 miles.
Yes.
And it became something that the community, this tiny community, suddenly was the centre of the world, the centre of US intelligence, the centre of Whitehall investigations, the centre of questions about terrorism. You remember that,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, look, I went up there the morning after. So it happened in the evening, we've heard about it, and then I was sent up first thing the next morning. I saw a Chinook pilot, and I got chatting to him. He was from kind of near where I used to live, from RAF Odium in Hampshire. And I said, can I come up with you? He goes, yeah, fine. And I was put on this bungee rope at the back of the Chinook. I never once asked what they had been tasked with doing, and they were collecting bodies in body bags. I was able-bodied. They said to me, come on, you've got to help lift it. And it was horrific, and it was deeply disturbing. But to your point, Eddie, about the community, I remember the dignity, I mean, the shock and that sense of what has just happened, and suddenly the media is landing in ever greater numbers in this community. I mean, the worst moment was being in the pub the night after, and because it's on the borders, they got the news from Carlisle or from south of the border. And the headline on the regional news, we'd all stayed to watch the 6 o'clock news, and the regional news headline was Carlisle Airport has its busiest day ever as rescues. And you thought, oh no, that's not the story. Is not Carlisle Airport having its busiest day. It's all these hundreds of people who've died. But they were trying to find their local angle on the whole thing. Just for you, kind of, I mean, do you? I mean, yeah. I'm older than you, but you remember it, yeah. Because it was one of those
18, 19,
formative things. You think,
Yes.
Christ, what's just happened?
You were just about to go off to drama school.
I was about to go to drama school. Yeah. I just got in, and I was working in Bethnal Green at the time in a menswear store, and it happened. And I remember it. But the amazing thing about the story is, like, the way this one couple found a body of a young man in their garden, and they treated him like he was their son.
Yeah, she didn't want to leave the body.
They didn't want it. It was their boy, And the character Phyllis Logan plays this brilliant character in the story of the Lockerbie women who washed all the clothes and sent it all back to the families because they realised that was the only way they could contribute to help them get through the trauma. It's an incredibly poignant story, really.
And what you realise watching it is that was such an analogue age of
Yes.
detective work. We didn't have phones, we didn't have that speed of communication. And, you come over, you're put on a plane as the FBI, the man who can spot the sort of the, what's it called? The traces of
Yes.
Semtex sort
Yes,
of thing.
explosives,
You're a bomb disposal
Yes.
expert in a former sort of life. And you come over and you are basically on the ground, touching things, looking at things. And we started sort of asking ourselves whether you would have that same both the same sense of community. If that happened today, you would have that same sense of community, or whether the story would just run away from you too quickly, on social media, with conspiracies.
Yes.
I don't know, it'd be a very different event today, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the story's been taken over by conspiracies even now, really, which is a shame because there's a trial coming up of is it Masood? They're trying to delay it for a year. So it's still ongoing. The story's still developing, even though we've made the drama.
Do you think you understand better what happened? I mean, we all remember the Libyan Abdel
Yes.
Bassett al-Megrahi,
Yes.
who was then imprisoned in Scotland, who was then freed by the Scottish Justice Secretary, Kenny McGaskill, because
Yes.
he was dying
Dying,
terminally ill. But this drama raises all sorts of questions about whether it was.
It raises the complexity of the investigation and the kind of dead ends they went down and the complexity of geopolitics and all that. But it gives an honest portrayal of the evidence, how it was presented in court. Because I think it wanted to do that. It's not a drama about conspiracy theories. It's a drama about a collective response to the tragedy. And that's why that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do it, really.
Eddie, I covered the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and I was struck then when I was in New York. If the same thing had happened today, would a nation have come together in the way that it did after 9/11? Because everything is so polarised. There are conspiracy theories. The right want to talk about their things.
Yes.
The left maybe want to talk about theirs. And never the twain shall meet. And, Lockerbie, again, was that kind of sense of an innocent age. And I know
Yes.
you've become increasingly disillusioned. I mean, you've come off social media
Yes.
because you just think it is so toxic.
Well, I think people confuse winning an argument with finding a solution. I don't think, for instance, the Good Friday Agreement got solved because someone won an argument. I think it got solved because someone found a solution. And what social media does is people confuse the two. There's a great saying by the physicist Niels Bohr when he said, for every great truth, the opposite is also true. And for every simple truth, the opposite is always false. And when you're on social media, people demand that you adhere to their simple truths, and they don't accept the paradox or the nuance of reality. And reality is always paradoxical. There's always two sides to a debate. So I came off of it because I was just tired of the echo chambers. I realised within myself that it would only be a certain amount of time before I posted something that was ill-considered or ill-informed, because I was getting passionate about things, but the information I was getting was purely dogmatic. Do you know what I mean? There was no self-correcting mechanism on social media.
Do you think it was inevitably going to be like that on social media, or do you think that sort of people like Elon Musk and others have made it immeasurably worse?
I think they've made it worse, immeasurably worse. I mean, I would follow commentators and experts and things, but then I just started getting stuff coming through that I had no interest in. And mainly I was being fed all this right-wing posts from people, and I think, well, I don't agree with these people, and yet it kept coming through. I thought I was being fed Elon Musk's opinion rather than my own,
What do you mean, no self-correcting mechanism? Do you mean that it's almost impossible to have an apology on social media, or do you mean that you wish that that people did point out things that you got wrong, but they can't do that, or what do you mean?
What I mean is the echo chamber. Echo chambers become almost like religious fanatics. So you create an orthodoxy, and if you step out of that orthodoxy, then you're punished.
Yeah.
And even people who are well-meaning, they're fed things that are just one side of a debate or one side of an argument, And as an actor, the reason it didn't appeal to me, because I left school at 15. I have no academic qualifications whatsoever. And my job as an actor, I've been an actor now for 34 years, and because of the way that I look, and because of where I come from, because we both come from Stepney, and because of that, I've always been cast in playing dodgy characters. So I've spent 30 years trying to understand people I don't necessarily agree with. That's been my job in order to play them.
But do you think you were typecast as a dodgy character?
Oh, 100%. I mean, look at my face.
Because of where you came from.
I think so, initially, yes. I mean, I was on Crime Monthly about 4 times and the Bill 4 times. I did every crime in London. And my community found it hilarious. But the thing they were most disappointed was I was always got caught. They said, we don't mind you being a villain, but you have to get caught all the time.
Fantastic. So so you're from Bethnal Green.
Yes.
And I was grew up down the road in
Yes.
Stepney. So I just wonder, when you look today at the way people talk about the white working class
Yes.
as having been left behind, marginalised. Tommy Robinson is the obvious place to go to.
Particularly the white working class man.
Yeah, the white working
Yes.
class man. But, you know, Tommy Robinson is the natural home for you if you are angry, fed up, feel that life... You're not Tommy Robinson.
No.
So
No.
do you think that this kind of portrayal of the white working class male as betrayed, no future, you've got a rail against immigration because they've taken your jobs, your houses, your whatever, is just mad?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience growing up in Tower Hamlets, which is probably one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, my experience of it is that the largest percentage of interrace marriage and mixed ethnicity children are from white working class and immigrants. So about 50% of the white working class accepted change. They accepted immigration, they accepted new people coming in. About 25% were kind of on the fence. If they had to share limited resources like doctors and schools, they began to question it. Yeah. But there was another 25%, and this is a rough assessment, but there was another 25% that would join the BNP and walk down Bethnal Green Road once a week and were just fascists. And I think that, especially, I was listening to your podcast when Keir Starmer made his speech recently, and you made a brilliant point where you said, rather than talk about control and contribution, he just talked about control. And he used terms like it was a squadded chapter, and it was an experiment that's gone wrong.
Well, he talked about an island of strangers as well, didn't he?
When I grew up, I am literally the product of diversity. My community that I was raised in was amazing. I had a difficult period in my teenage years because of my parents had a difficult marriage, and my community stepped up. All aspects, and a diverse community, and it was an absolute privilege to live in that community. And I think one of the reasons, I'm sorry to interrupt, one of the reasons is when I look, quite often I get asked to play Jewish characters from the East End, because a lot of writers in the film industry had grandfathers who grew up in the East End. They lived in Brick Lane or Stepney or whatever. And when they listen to my natural accent and I speak a bit of Yiddish that they write in, they say, "Oh my God, that's my grandfather. That's exactly how he sounded." And so what I realised was that my parents grew up and went to the same youth clubs as their grandfathers. But now their generation are writers and solicitors and lawyers, and it's the immigrant experience. Because they were immigrants, they were thinking long term. The East End is a place where immigrants come in, but they're thinking generations ahead. I'm making this choice to come here because I want, in 3 generations' time, I want my.
You want your kids to be outperforming you and your standard of living.
And the problem with the East End, and I can see it within my family, I'm half immigrant and half East End for literally till the Middle Ages, I think. I mean, we go back, we was in and out of workhouses and prisons for the last 400 or 500 years on one side of my family. And what poverty does to you is poverty creates short-termism. So you literally, economically, you can't think beyond the next week. So practically, you don't think beyond the next week. And morally, you don't think beyond the next week. Everything is about... There's even a saying in East End where you don't earn a living. Yeah, I can nick about 300 quid a week. You don't literally nick, but to earn a living is to nick money. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
because you feel like life's against you and you just got to get on any way you can. Yeah.
So Eddie, when you heard Keir Starmer making that speech about, you know, Island of Strangers and all the rest of it, which some people said had very strong echoes of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, did you think he's getting this wrong? Or did you think this is probably the right tactics if you're going to take on Farage and Reform and all the rest of it?
No, I thought he was getting it wrong. I listened to what Lord Dubs said when you interviewed him, and I thought he hit it on the nail. I thought he was 100% correct. The problem is that if you use the language of that extreme 25%, you will never satiate them. You can never go far enough for them, because it is their sense of identity, the anger and resentment and the nativism that they have is their sense of identity, and you can never satiate them. You can try to. What you should actually do is the way you spoke about contribution and control, but speak about the contribution. But you can't deny the contribution because it's there for us all to see.
But okay, so Eddie, you're the poster boy of the white working class East End lad who kind of has had his dream career and his dream life. And I guess, I mean, I'm assuming there must be some sympathy for what many of those kids now are going through, isn't there? I mean, the white working class male who, do you think they are voiceless? Do you think they are ignored? Do you think they have become the underdog?
What you have to ask yourself is, one of the problems I have is when you talk about the working class, quite often people talk about the white working class. Where I grew up, it wasn't just... Most of us were literally 2 generations away from grandparents coming from somewhere else. And I'm not the exception. On my estate, I am not the exception. I have close friends of mine, their children are now write novels, and they go around the world with their children to conferences and stuff, promoting their novels. My friend Emmanuel deals in property. I have another friend of mine who runs a printing business.
So has something changed? That's what I'm asking. Has something changed?
No,
do you think that we've just adopted a sort of lazy assumption that...
What the problem is, I think, is if you come from an immigrant community, you think long term.
Yeah.
You put more investment in education and learning, and the problem with the white...
But if you don't...
if you don't, the problem from my experience, and I can only speak from my experience of the white working class, is that we value identity, we value patriotism, we wrap ourselves in a flag, we value tribalism, and I think what that does is it allows you to be manipulated by people like Trump and Tommy Robinson, and they'll be walking down. I mean, these guys used to walk down Bethnal Green Road 3 times a year, and they were waving their flags, but it never improved their lives. You can't eat a flag. Where if you look now, you look at the education statistics now, but amongst the white working class as opposed to the children of immigrants, Chinese and African and Asian and black kids, they're outscoring them. Why are they outscoring them? Because they are the children of immigrants, and the immigrants value education. Yeah. What they do is they don't look at identity, they don't look at themselves as a fixed thing. They look at themselves as potential.
Yeah, what they could be.
What they could be. And we look at ourselves as, this is what I am and don't you dare change it. That's the problem.
That's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating.
But you responded to Tommy Robinson. I mean, you know, for all you said about not wanting to say the wrong thing on social media, you responded to one of
because
Tommy Robinson's tweets.
I literally grew up with people like Tommy Robinson walking down Bethnal Green Road 3 times a week, and if I'd go and get a bagel on a Sunday morning on Brick Lane, there'd be the National Front would be on the corner of Brick Lane every week. I grew up with this.
And what did you say to him?
I can't really say.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can, believe me. We've all said worse.
We'd all tell him to off. I mean, my mum, when I was a kid, my mum got me a T-shirt that said "One race, the human race." And I
said what?
She said, "One race, the human race." And she said, "Go and stand on the corner, boy, and tell them, and go." Oh, it's terrible, but she said, "Stand on the corner, boy, and cut them off."
Okay, we haven't had that one before.
Yeah, that's good. Actually, I now know you're absolutely proper East End. Because you said bagel, not bagel.
Not bagel, bagel.
I always grew up calling them bagels, and suddenly, you know, we get westernised and Americanised, and they're bagels. They're bagels.
They're bagels, not bagel. I remember when going to drama school, someone said to me, "Would you like a bagel?" And I didn't know what they were talking about.
Weirdos.
Just on that, when you were going to drama school, Would the 16-year-old Eddie Marsan find it as easy to get into drama school today? I mean, you had people who wanted to help you along the way.
Yeah, I didn't. Mr. Bennett, who was an East End bookmaker, and he paid for me to go to drama school. But there was no grants then. The GLC, or I think that was the council then, weren't giving grants for drama. So there was no way. Now you could get a loan, but you'd be an incredible amount of debt. So it is harder. I think, I've been talking to BAFTA about this, that I think within film companies, sometimes they go to a certain area in the UK. There's a Sheffield Film Fund or a Welsh Film Fund or something, and I think those film funds should say, if you come here and you benefit economically or through tax breaks or whatever to make a film here, one of the things you have to do is pay for a term for a kid from an underprivileged background to be in front of the camera or behind the camera. You have to pay it forward, and I think they could do that. I don't think that's going to be I know the budgets are tight, but when you look at the budgets of films, you could easily afford to do that.
You do a lot of work in America.
Yes.
Do you get worried by Trump's pronouncements on foreign films, and even foreign films as in making films that America imports?
It doesn't make any sense. I remember the first day it happened, everyone was panicking, and then I'm working on something now, and it's an American company, and we all just sat around, and it's there's nothing you can do about it because there's no logic to it. You don't know how you could implement that. I mean, if you make films are not made. You write a film in the US and you shoot it in the UK, or you shoot it in a location because it has to be in a certain location to look that way. And then the publicity department is in the US, and quite often the publicity is more than the film itself.
It's not a sneaker.
It's not. So how do you deem what is the product? What is the final product? It doesn't make any sense. You can't make everything on a back lot in Culver City.
So do you find you just let all the noise go?
Yeah, you just it doesn't make any. It's like my dad when he gets half cut at Christmas. You just think, have another mince pie, and and they'll fall asleep in half an hour.
So you're hoping that Donald Trump has another mince pie and falls asleep
It just
in half an hour?
It doesn't make. There's no logic to it. Do you know what I mean?
Eddie, you said that Starmer couldn't just imitate the language of the right or the hard right or the Farage right or whatever, because otherwise that's where you'd end up going if you were a voter, if you liked that. We've got a spending review coming up next week. I mean, we're right in the middle of this big announcement on defence spending. Do you have sympathy with the idea that he feels he has to stick to the fiscal rules? He feels he has to put defence first. He has to get things right and find the money for them before he can actually find the extra money to spend on whatever it is, ending the cap on child benefits.
Yeah, well, it's about. I think a lot of it is about narrative, isn't it? Really, it's not about. People don't want facts; they want a narrative that they can believe in. So I can understand that. I think that if, when I went back to the analogy of the 25%, that 25% they're on the fence. They're on the fence because of limited resources, because they have to share. Their kids have to suddenly have 5 more kids in their classroom, and there's a classroom of 35 rather than 30, and they've got to wait 1 more hour for the doctors, or that's if you address that. And social housing is. I grew up in social housing. We're not making social housing anymore, and you should invest in social housing. I think that would be a means, a kind of quantitative easing for the working class. And the working class spend their money in high streets and in cafes and in restaurants. They don't save their money. So that would be a way in which you would funnel money into communities and make it flow more, I think.
And you've spoken so kind of affectionately about the immigrant experience.
Yes.
But I guess if you're looking at the numbers now in terms of immigration, illegal immigration, people seeking asylum, people coming over in boats, many people in this country just see the numbers and say it's totally out of control. Would you still make the case that actually we do have to have immigration, even if it's from irregular routes? We do have to welcome people of all different communities, or do you think it's a different a different time and a different scale now.
No, I still think I still speak. My own experience of living amongst immigration was that it made the best of me. There's many different forms of some people have a privileged upbringing because they're economically privileged. My privileged upbringing was because there was literally a synagogue at the end of the street and a mosque and a Buddhist center and a church, and you learnt to what it made you do was in a sense initially reject your own cultural orthodoxy and take the best bits and reject the worst. And we all, I mean, me and my friends now, we all created a kind of cultural and historical narrative that we could all live with. So I think that's, I think what you said before about control and contribution, I think I think it's a really, it's a positive, change is a positive thing, and it's never, don't be afraid of change. What happened to me was when I went to drama school, they teach you how to breathe. You spend 3 months on your back. And then at the end of Bethnal Green, on Roman Road, there was a Buddhist centre. And they were doing breathing exercises for meditation. And I went. And I started to go every week to learn how to breathe deeper. And then I got into meditation. And I've been meditating for about 30 years. And when I started to go, I then went to the Buddhist centre to listen to a lecture about this Buddhist theory called anatman, which means no self. And what the Buddha said was, we don't have a fixed self. So John and Emily and Eddie, we're not eternal fixed things. We exist, but we are subject to the environment, so we can change. We are potential. And then I left the Buddhist centre and I walked past a pub and I heard a white bloke in the pub talking about, you know, those immigrant bars. And I remember thinking, oh, you're afraid of self. You're afraid of losing yourself and a change. But actually, it's all right. Because we are all changing all the time. So this idea when Theresa May said, you are, what is it? She said, you are.
Yeah, nowhere, somewheres, and nowheres.
Yeah, well, that's.
Or anywheres, maybe it was.
Nowhere, somewhere. But I kind of think that's what we all are. Because that's what potential is. Don't define.
So do you think politicians are scared to say that to people? I mean, whose fault is that? Do you think politicians should be braver in turning round to your guy in the pub and saying, "Oh, get over yourself and listen," or do you think they should actually listen to people's fears better?
I don't know. I mean, if I was a politician, I'd probably be trying to tell everybody to meditate.
I was interested in your use of the word. I was interested in your use of the word narrative.
Yes.
What Keir Starmer's problem is he lacks a narrative, and I keep hearing that. Is he unable to tell a story about what he's trying to do, where he's trying to lead? What is it?
I don't know. I mean, I think he's a very decent man. I like him.
Yeah,
I do. I trust him. I know many people who are brilliant storytellers. I know I've worked with actors for 30 odd years. They're brilliant at creating narratives. I wouldn't trust them to make a cup of tea.
I mean, Farage is a storyteller.
Yeah, and Farage is a great storyteller and a great narrative, but it's a very simplistic, kind of populist narrative that doesn't bear any scrutiny to truth. When you look at it, really, he says all these things, and that's why it appeals to people, because populism is simple lies. Preferred to complex
So how do you wean
truths.
people off that then? I mean, I know, sorry, I'm treating you like you are actually a Buddha as opposed to a Buddhist. But how do you wean people off that then? If what you've said is people much prefer digesting simple stories like the one that Farage says, and when Keir Starmer comes out with his ums and his decency and his hard facts, it doesn't go through.
Well, look, I'm involved in the Windrush campaign, right? And the Windrush campaign is brilliant because I think the Tory government miscalculated how, within urban centres, we are all members of the Windrush generation, all of us, because we all went to school with the kids, we danced to the same music, we ate the same food, we've probably got.
Yeah, we're entwined.
Yeah, we're entwined completely, and I think that is a brilliant way of showing. Look, this is the visceral advantage of immigration, how brilliant it can be. And I think that is being lost. The story of immigration is when someone lives next door, moves next door to you from a different colour, different religion. At first, you're scared of them, you're hesitant, and then gradually you get to know them. And within 10, 15 years, your kids are going out together, you're playing in the same football team, and you transcend those things.
But maybe, Eddie, if there's one person, that works. If there's 100 people, that doesn't work.
I understand that, but that's what I mean. Economically, you need that 100 people because we need immigration because we need to survive economically. But also, that's why you need to create more resources and you need to create social housing. I mean, there was 100 people. When I grew up, there was 100 people. There was, and we got on fine. Yeah. We had a brilliant time.
Eddie Marsan, what a pleasure. Come back, will you? Or what are you thinking?
So
no, bloody hell. You'll bring the bike. We'll smoke some bikers, bit of cream cheese on the side. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've kind of had a theme, if there is a theme, running through the show so far, which is about, the need to deal with populism, the need to deal with the Russian threat, how you face down populism as a whole. And we've just had the elections in Poland overnight, which shows that the right-wing historian / populist Karol Nawrocki has been elected Poland's new president, although by the narrowest of margins.
Yeah, it was an incredibly tight presidential election that ended up with 1%, virtually 1% difference between the two candidates. And why this has been watched so closely is because Donald Tusk, the sort of famously liberal pro-EU Prime Minister, won the general election 2 years ago and hailed what people thought was a return of Poland to something that looked more EU friendly, more centrist. The party of law and justice was thrown out the window. Nawrocki is very much in the model of the party of law and justice. Indeed, he got firm backing from them. Indeed, he got backing from our friend Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security in Trump's administration. And he represents somebody who looks Trump-friendly, anti-EU, very populist. And it suggests that Poland hasn't quite reconciled the direction it wants to go in now. And that is, as we watch the fracture, in a way, of the EU, some of which is going steadily towards a much more populist bent, and some of which is trying desperately to hold on to what would have been the original centrist values.
Yeah, I mean, the Polish president has limited powers. You've got some veto powers.
Yeah.
You're not shaping foreign policy. Broadly speaking, they are both, the presidential candidates are pro-support for Ukraine. But what you've got now is exactly as you say, another sign that right-wing populism is nowhere near defeated. And you think of the fuss that Trump supporters made when a straggle of Labour activists from the UK went over to support Kamala Harris before the election, and how dare Labour interfere. I mean, Kristi Noem, a member of Trump's administration, went to Poland to tell people how to vote. That's election interference.
Yeah, and you say Nawrocki has limited legislative power, but actually he's already said his mission is to scupper Tusk's premiership until those parliamentary elections in the autumn of 2027. And he can actually stop key votes on things like abortion, the liberalisation of the abortion ban, the introduction of same-sex civil partnerships, a clean out of the judiciary. So actually a lot of Tusk's reforming agenda, which he's only 2 years into, which is trying to undo all the kind of banning and very hard right areas of the previous administration, the Law and Justice Party, is now going to be undone. I mean, it's like, do you remember that chocolate game that we used to play as kids where if you throw a 6, you carve up the chocolate? It's like the 6 has been thrown already. You have to stop carving the chocolate and go back to the beginning again. And now it's the populists who are actually dominating what happens in Poland for the next 2 years.
We will be back tomorrow carving up chocolate again.
You never played that game, did you?
Never played it. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'll show you later.
We're going to play chocolate again.
Please write in if you remember the chocolate game with the mittens and the hat and the rolling the 6. Thank you.
I think she's gone mad. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.